Great. So, hi everyone. Thank you all for coming to the AHA seminar series. That's actually the first of the semester. And today we're very excited to have Professor Amit Goldenberg from the Harvard Business School. And I'll just read a brief speaker bio and then I'll let Amit take over with this wonderful talk. So, Professor Amit Goldenberg is Assistant Professor of Harvard Business School in the Negotiation, Organization, and Markets Unit, and also an affiliate with Harvard's Department of Psychology and a member of the Digital Data and Design Institute. Professor Goldenberg's research focuses on what makes people emotional in both social and group contexts, and also how much emotions can be changed when they're unhelpful or undesired. And he's particularly interested in how technology is used for both emotion detection and regulation. Of course, today you'll hear about more of the focus on AI in his talk. In his work, Professor Goldenberg integrates experimental psychology that examines behavior at the individual and collective levels. To integrate these domains, he employs a multi-method approach that combines behavioral experiments, analysis of data from data, digital media, computational modeling, and of course, AI. So without further ado, Amit, take it away.
All right. Hi, everyone. Good to see you. I'm not sure I'm seeing you, but good to virtually sense your presence in the form of your names. It's really great to be here and to tell you a little bit about my work on AI and emotional support. I'm gonna feel free to ask questions as we go. I have a lot of content and I don't feel very much obligated to kind of go through everything. So I'm happy to answer any questions that you may have, and I'll try to monitor the chat as much as possible. But if you really want to ask a question, feel free to just raise your hand and happy to entertain. I want to start with a thought experiment and ask you to take a moment to think about a significant emotional experience that you've had in the past month. It could involve a situation in either your personal or professional life that you're particularly emotional from. And in addition to thinking about that emotional experience, I want to ask you whether um, you would prefer to share this experience with an AI, ChatGPT or a companion, or a human that you don't know. And think about your choice. Now, some of you may already be annoyed by this question, as you may say to yourself, sure, fine, I can come up with an answer. Okay, yeah, there's some preference. But what is this dilemma is trying to simulate? I mean, when am I going to ever have to choose between an AI or someone that I don't know? And this view is somewhat presented in many kind of people who are critical of research and thinking of AI and a sort of emotional support. One of them is a colleague of mine that I very much admire, Molly Crockett, a psychologist at Princeton. And she claims that the whole notion that these kind of experiments for comparing human to kind of AI and looking at how these entities provide different emotional responses is kind of makes no sense. And because they don't simulate anything that really happens in reality. Let's say you're having a bad day, Molly says in a column that she recently wrote. You're probably not logging into Reddit to receive a generic written response from a stranger, even one who's expertly trained to respond empathically to strangers. And while I'm sympathetic to this perspective, and I do think that it captures something really important about the limitation of some of the comparisons that I'll show you in a few slides. I do want to point out a few things about AI emotional support that kind of help me to set the stage better for the research that I'm going to present. And I want to make a few points before I go into the empirical research that I think could help you kind of get a sense of what I'm thinking and how I'm thinking about this situation and this context. So hopefully it will generate a better discussion. So the first thing that I want to point out is there is a huge unmet need for emotional support around the world. For example, this survey asked the number of close friendships that Americans have other than their family or not counting their relatives. And as you can see, I'm looking at the people who say they have no friends. That number has grown from 3% in 1990 to 12% in 2021. Um, we see this kind of data basically everywhere we look. So, for example, this is a graph that looks at the share of high school seniors who go out for fun or recreation once a week or less. And the number has gone up from 22% to 43% in 2020. So, in other words, there is a strong unmet need for emotional support, and the people who are those 12% who basically don't have any friends to interact actually do reach out on Reddit forums and to receive emotional support from strangers in all sorts of contexts. And so, at least for these people, kind of these question of who would you choose is actually relevant. And there's not only a strong unmet need for emotional support, there's also a lot of products, companies, and entities who are trying to satisfy that need. So, for example, what we're looking in the picture is LEQ. This is a robot that is designed to provide to be a companion for older adults. If you live in California or New York and you're above the age of 70, you can get in line for LEQ for free through Medicare or Medicaid, depending on where you live. And LEQ provides a variety of service. It can remind you how to take medications, to exercise, to connect with the people you love through this tiny screen, but it also is supposed to be a companion that reduces your loneliness. And LEQ is actually the like a good player, or at least a kind of healthy player in this space. There's also some players who like an AI companion. Replica is the most common companion, who's basically designed to increase engagement. Replica is kind of more focused on kind of sexual interactions. It suggests that you buy her or him some clothes, and of course in the middle between those there's obviously GPT and ChatGPT and services like ChatGPT, Anthropic, and all these other companies. And a lot of people use them for emotional support. So there's a recent work by Stat et al. Showing that 24% of users use ChatGPT for some level of emotional support. Um, and ChatGPT gets more than 1 million people talking about suicides a week. So there is a need, and the use is also increasing. I want to point out to a really interesting analysis that was done a few years ago already by Bethany Maples, who basically looked at replica users, kind of learning who are the people who are actually using these companions, who are the heavy users of companions. And one of the findings of this paper is that 90% of our typically single, young, low-income, full-time students reported experiencing loneliness compared to 53 in the prior studies in US students. So in other words, there is a need. This need is satisfied by people are reaching AI to satisfy that need, either on a kind of more regular basis or sporadically. And the people who are using it, the heavy users of AI companions for emotional support, are actually people who are lonelier. So the story of AI and emotional support, in many aspects, is a story of access. People who don't have access to other humans, to therapy, and so on, will more likely to use it. So I want to point out to a quote that Mark Zuckerberg's provided in a recent interview, and he says that there is the stat that I always think is crazy, and the average American, I think, has fewer than 3 friends, and the average person has demand for meaningfully more. I think like 15 friends or something, right? And so Mark is suggesting that potentially AI entities can fill that gap of 3 to 13. And while we can spend a lot of time being really angry at Mark Zuckerberg and for not only creating the problem of people having less friends, or at least playing some part in the problem, but now trying to kind of provide products that not only will maybe solve it, but kind of make it even kind of more challenging. And the main point here is really that uh, other than getting upset, we can also start thinking about what does it mean to receive emotional support from AI? What does it mean to have a companion that is an AI? What are the consequences of this? What do people want when interacting with AI? And so on and so forth. And one thing that I think is interesting is that we're now kind of transitioning from an attention economy, social media, to an attention attachment economy. So an economy that makes profit from attachment. Okay, so the second point that I want to make before I even start the talk and show you any empirical data is that many people are already use AI for emotional support. And so it's our role as researchers who are interested in AI and well-being to kind of explore this space and understand it. Um, um, and the final point that I want to make is that I think that AI and emotional support is more like I think about it a little bit like fast food. It has an immediate appeal, and it is good when you taste it for the first time, maybe even better than the real thing. But people who usually use it often do it because they don't have access to healthier food, and the outcome of their consumption, the long-term outcome in terms of health, may not be as good. This is also the point in the talk where people get really hungry. So I'll just move away from this burger, and I'll tell you that I'm gonna talk today about, or try to address, three open questions in relation to this notion of AI and emotional support. The first question is, how does emotional support provided by AI differ from that provided by human? Um, or another way to ask it, is it really better as everyone says? And here we're not focusing on kind of deep emotional support, but rather these kind of short messages that are criticized, but can still tell us something, I think, interesting about the nature of AI emotional support. The second question that I'm hoping to address is, how does knowledge about the source of support impact the quality of support? So, how does the fact that we receive emotional support from AI change that our experience of that support? And finally, I'm hoping to ask, what does choice, how does choice and what do we want play, and what role does it play in the quality of our support? All right, so starting with the first question, how does emotional support provided by AI differ from that provided by human? This is work done by two people in my lab, Alina and Joanna. And our focus in this work is on a specific emotion. Right? So what we try to do in this study is, this was one of our first studies in this space, is we try to kind of minimize the domain of, so reduce a lot of the noise that emerge from natural interactions and try to capture things in a clean way as possible so we can dissect these interactions in the most accurate way. So instead of just looking at emotional support in general, we focused on one specific type or strategy of emotional support called reappraisal, which is an emotion regulation strategy focused on changing the meaning of the situation to modify its emotional impact. So here's an example. This is a person saying that their boss was rude to them in front of everyone and feels embarrassed, so they're sharing an emotional experience. And a form of reappraising, for example, can be said, repurposing, trying to extract some positive aspects of that situation. So this revealed their true nature in front of everyone. Or aberration, which is what you think is kind of a representative example of that person, is actually maybe an extreme. So he generally loves you, perhaps he had a bad day. So people constantly provide reappraisal both themselves when they're kind of trying to change their own emotions, and when interacting with other people, friends or other people that they know, in kind of helping people change their emotions. And this is probably the most research emotions regulation strategy, emotion support strategy. Has a plethora of evidence showing that it's extremely useful, and that people who use it more are usually better off. Okay, so in this study, we had 386 people asked to write about a recent negative social experience they had. Could be a minor or major event in any area of your life. And after participants wrote this, they were either assigned to interact with another person, or with an AI, in this case, GPT-4. And these people were instructed to provide reappraisal to the person. Now, in order to help the participants and GPT-4 understand reappraisal, although at this point I'm sure that reappraisal does not need any training on providing reappraisal, we used this reappraisal training that we developed a few years ago during COVID, which was implemented in sort of 87 countries and regions around the world, 21,000 people. So we feel pretty confident that when people do this training, they then learn how to provide reappraisal, and their reappraisal seemed to work. And we basically had this training, had both participants and GPT go through this training, where basically you learn what reappraisal is. We give you some kind of test on to make sure that you understand. We give you some examples. You're practicing a little bit on all sorts of context. Um, and so we had participants and GPT provide that reappraisal to participants in real time. And then participants basically rated the quality of the reappraisal that they received on 4 dimensions: effectiveness, empathy, novelty, and specificity. So we just wanted to see the comparison. Um, and what we find is maybe probably not that surprising to any of you. Generally speaking, GPT provided reappraisals that were rated by participants as better in effectiveness, in their degree of empathy, in how novel they were, but not specifically in how specific they were to the specific context. But generally, GPT outperformed humans in their ability to provide these reappraisals. Now, one interesting question that we've had is the difference between GPT and participants was primarily driven by the fact that participants were not really, may have not been really motivated to do a good job here. I mean, we're not paying them to be good at reappraisal. We're just paying them to do it. Whereas GPT, its motivation is the same regardless of the context. And so to test that, what we did was we paid participants money and told them that they'll get rewarded if they do a good job. Um, and that hasn't changed anything, basically. People took more time to write reappraisals, but the difference between participants but the quality of the reappraisals have not changed necessarily. And so we're pretty certain that it's not about motivation. We paid them a lot of money to be better, and still we haven't seen any change in the quality. And just as a reference, I mean, GPT was ranked basically in the 80th percentile, GPT-4. Okay, so fine. Okay, so we have this initial understanding that GPT can do better in these short messages, but I think what's interesting here is really not that much the raw comparison of quality, but also trying to understand what exactly is the reason why people rate GPT better than humans. And so one idea that we've had is that perhaps what's happening here is that people are using this reappraisal as some kind of a signal to the quality of support that the person can provide. And we're doing this all the time. I mean, in our lives, we've spent a lot of our time learning these small, short signals of who's going to do a better job at providing emotional support. And because GPT is basically trained on providing feedback that is highly valued by humans, it's possible that GPT may sound more sophisticated or generally is providing a better kind of support in general, and therefore that's why it's valued as better. So one way to kind of address this is to say, is it the case that GPT is using more complex words? And by complex, I mean words that are rated by other people as more complex. So we use this complexity lexicon where people rate word complexity, and both in a vignette study and in real-time scenarios, we basically see that GPT is rated as using more complex language. So sure, it seems more sophisticated, but complexity only weakly correlated with quality. So there is a difference here, but that's not the difference is not predicting the quality. Um, Another idea that we had is perhaps maybe it's not complexity, but some unique language that GPT is using that people kind of interpret as indicating providing higher emotional support. So what we did was a TF-IDF. We basically look at unique terminology that is more likely to be used by GPT rather than humans. So here are words that are more likely to be used by humans, but not GPT, and GPT and not by humans. These are not mutually exclusive. Some words may appear in both. But one thing that seems to be quite clear is that there's kind of longer, more sophisticated maybe words that GPT is using, appreciate and boundaries, dedication, and so on and so forth. And so it is the case that humans who use the unique GPT words are rated as better, which made me and kind of my student think, what is really we're capturing here? Is it possible that the reason why GPT is ranked as higher in reappraisal is really because it provides a better facade of someone who's better at emotional support rather than some really inherent ability to do it better? And so this is a project that is led by one of my students, Hanshu Lee. And what we did was we um, we had people share an experience and receive a response from human, but we've added a layer on the human response, and we use GPT to basically slightly modify the human responses by replacing words from the bag of words that were uniquely used by GPT. So basically, GPT took the human response, and the only thing that they changed is they took some words and kind of substituted them with like uniquely GPT words. So kind of improved the facade of the response to seem more like I guess, GPT. So here, what I'm showing you are the four ratings, the quality ratings that I showed you earlier. But here is on the x-axis is the number of AI infused words. So we took the human response and infused it with some words. And one thing that we see here looking at effective, for example, is as we infuse more GPT words, the quality rated by participants of the response that they got goes up. So much that with more or less three words, we basically get something close to the GPT original mean. And that's true for all of these ratings. So what I take from this is that, yeah, people do rate GPT responses as better than humans without knowing who the source is. But it's possible that what's happening here is not that there's some inherent ability that is better, but rather the facade just looks more like someone who would be good or better at emotional support. And because we're really good at reading these and saying and predicting that, and GPT was trained on that, that's what's driving the difference. Okay, so I'm gonna keep on going because no one is asking questions, but if feel free to ask questions. I think that the second thing that we were really interested in understanding, um, okay, so we have a question by HP. Just for clarification, the scores which were given were the participants themselves. Yes. Was there a rubric shared with the participants to ensure that everyone was scoring the same thing, since these dimensions can be quite subjective? Yeah, there's a lot of variance in how people think about this, and that's definitely something that is challenging. We did provide with some instructions on how to rank them, and that could be driving some of the thing. But yeah, for sure. But these were subjective ratings. Okay, so far everything that we've seen here showed us that the quality was evaluated when you didn't know who's on the other side of that interaction. But um and it seems like what people are doing is estimating quality of support by predicting some inherent ability. But really, how does the knowledge about who's providing you support or what is providing you support really impact the quality of the subjective evaluation of your support? So this is a project that was led by Matan Rubin and Anat Perry, um, and the idea was that we repeated the paradigm that I've shared with you earlier, where people share an emotional response and they've received some response, but we modified the perception, the user perception, the participant perception of who is providing them with that emotional support, whether it was a human or an AI. And in this study, we focused on empathy. And the reason why we did that is because empathy is an interesting construct that can be broken down into three components. A cognitive component, one where sort of I understand what the other side is describing and I understand their situation. An affective component where I share the emotions of the other partner, and a motivational components where I show care um, and kind of motivation to help the other partner. And the reason why this is interesting is we can have AI focus on these three different components and see how they impact users' perspective. So let me walk you through the paradigm. So participants were told they're either paired with a human or an AI, but we're always paired with an AI. And after being paired, participants were asked to share an emotional experience that they had in the last month. And in study one, GPT models were prompted to be empathic on all three aspects of empathy. So this was a one-turn conversation. In study two, GPT models were prompted to respond in a way that would mostly convey a specific aspect of empathy, either understanding, feeling, or caring. And this was a one-turn conversation. And then participants rated how much empathy they felt by the other party. Before we kind of just to address, we replicated this in a longer conversation with other LLMs when GPT was instructed to produce short responses and where participants were asked to wait 3 minutes before a response to kind of address all sorts of limitations. Um, I want to start with the initial finding, which is when participants learn, conditional on given the same response, right? Because it's AI every time. When participants believe that they receive a response from a human, they tend to think they rate the responses as more empathic. So there is some drop in the quality of empathic response that people rate when they think it's an AI. Uh, this study was done a few years ago when people kind of you could they didn't yet believe that AI could generate these great responses. And so at the end of the study, we asked participants, to what extent do you think that this AI was aided by a human, or vice versa, the human was aided by AI? And one thing that you see if you look at the blue line, these were people that thought they were interacting with a human. uh, the more they thought that that human was aided by AI, the lower the ratings were. So this is really about us seeking a human. And when we think that that human is aided by AI, we think that the response is less empathic. And one of the deeper kind of questions here is why? What is really driving that? And so one way to kind of capture that idea is um, to basically do what we did in study two, which is we prompted the AI to be either focus on the cognitive aspect of empathy, the emotional aspect of empathy, and the motivational aspect of empathy. So when AI is focusing more on caring, as expressing kind of messages that are about caring for you and so on and so forth, we see this drop uh, uh, pretty big. Same with an affective response. So when the response has a lot of expressed emotion, we see this drop when we just shift the label from AI to human. But when it's just a cognitive response, we don't see that drop. Um, which to me is suggest that it reveals that what we're really after when we seek for an empathic response is more or one thing that we value is that kind of affective response and motivational response, something that basically AIs can't provide. I also want to point out something which is that there's no difference in how people rate the AI, but rather the difference is driven mainly by the human evaluation. So, in other words, people reward humans for expressing compassion or motivational response and affect. So, there's no difference in how AI. It's not that people penalize AI for expressing emotions, it's just they don't reward it, whereas they do reward humans for doing that. Um, Okay, so let me address some questions, or feel free to talk. But okay. Chen is asking, what about the improvement in Gemini in the last couple of months? Seems everything changes so fast that it's hard to make research. Thanks. Yeah, I mean, it is hard to make research in this space, and it's moving really fast. But I don't think that if we had a better language model producing that responses, we wouldn't see that drop. Because I think that what this study reveals is that it's not only about the quality of the actual response, but what people are really seeking is as a person on the other side, or at least that adds some value to the quality of response. Now, why is that is a really interesting question. Um, you could make a biological argument that really what people are after is the presence of other human beings rather than it doesn't really matter the quality matters to some extent, but really what people need is the presence of other people. This relates to some work on loneliness that suggests that loneliness is a need just like food or sleep, and people who are sleep deprived look like or lonely look like they're sleep deprived in terms of their brain. Um, so that's one way to examine this. Another is that there's something about the caring of another person that is what we need because we're trying to predict who will be a reliable partner for us, a reliable, not partner from the romantic sense, but from a partner in any aspect. And as providing an empathic response is a strong signal for that. But with AI, that does not provide that signal. I mean, it's not other things may be providing. And so that's another kind of some thoughts that are floating around on why that difference is emerging. But this is an open question. Okay, I'll transition to, oh, I want to summarize this and then I'll address some questions. So one thing that we've done recently is we try to take stock on all these studies that compare human and AI empathy and look at the differences. And one thing that we see is that when it comes to short messages from an unknown source, AI seems to produce responses that are valued as more empathic compared to humans. The effect size is quite big, is 0.55 of a Cohen's d. And this is a list of all the studies that we were able to find with these with these differences. There's some trained professionals here in some cases. So it doesn't seem to be, but no studies have like looked at friends. That's a common question that I often get asked. So, but there's also what we call an AI penalty, which is what I just showed you. When empathic responses are labeled as generated by AI, people prefer them less compared to when they're labeled as written by human. And the effect size for that is 0.38. Um, and I want to point out that these two things go against each other. But I also want to say, I mean, notice that the effect size of the AI penalty is smaller than the AI advantage. Now, you probably are asking, okay, how many studies are there where the comparison, where, you know, there was both were done, meaning both the label was shifted and people knew who they're interacting with, and it was either a human or an AI. There's not a lot. There's one paper by Yin et al. That actually shows no difference there. So in other words, when you know who you're interacting with, you don't tend to think that AI is more empathic than humans, so the effect is kind of reduced to zero. But that's just one study, and there's a lot of work to be done here. Okay, so I'll try to address some questions before I talk about the last thing. Could it be reciprocity? People tend to, oops, it's jumping very fast. Uh, People tend to or want to give when give a give. Yeah, it's definitely true that there's some reciprocity driving this thing for sure. Um, Okay, it's very hard for me to answer questions from the chat. So if you have a question and you want to raise your hand, I'm happy to entertain. I don't know if I have that possibility, but I'll just keep on going. Okay, so far, I've shown you comparisons where people don't really have a choice on who to interact with. One interesting question is, what role does choice play in the quality of support? And what do people really want? Do people prefer to get these responsible responses from AI or humans? And so this is a study that led by Yoshi Shi, and we go back to this prompt that I've started the talk with, and I asked you to take a moment to think about a significant emotional experience that you had in the past months. We asked participants to do this, and we asked participants to choose whether they want to share that emotion or emotional experience with a bot or a human that they don't know. Um, and what we did was we not only asked them who they want to choose, but we also gave them either what they chose or not what they chose. So this is a 2 by 2 where people make a choice on who they want to share, either a human or an AI, and then they either get what they chose, a human or an AI, or not. So let's start with the choice. Our participants, 69.6% of our participants chose to have a conversation with an AI companion versus another participant about their emotional experience. So we had a large majority of people preferring to talk to an AI. Now, this could be driven by a lot of things, the study setting, the novelty of this idea. And so I don't know that this reflects some true preference in reality. My colleagues who are doing these studies in other contexts show much lower numbers, around 10 to 20%. We also asked how much would you like to talk to about this emotional experience with an AI companion, so a more continuous, and we see a significant impact on AI. Okay. What I think is more interesting is before we assign them their partner in the conversation, we examined people's perception of receiving an emotional support with a human or an AI companion, and we asked them questions on kind of four dimensions: how on perceived non-judgment, perceived emotional support, what people thought is the quality of emotional support, the quality of advice that they will receive from a human or an AI, and confidentiality. And what I'm showing you here is people's ratings before they had an interaction on who they wanna on their ratings on their partner. So a few things to point out. First, it seems like overall people think that humans are better than emotional support compared to AI. This is before the interaction. They don't see a lot of difference in advice. They think, and on the other side, they think that AI will be much more non-judgmental, and so less judgment from AI, and more confidentiality. Now, what's amazing about these preferences is that they look completely different if we condition it on on people's choices. So I want to point out the non-judgment aspect and show you that for people who chose AI, they perceive AI to be extremely more non-judgmental than humans. Whereas those who preferred humans actually we don't see that difference at all. If we focus on emotional support, we see something also pretty amazing. The people who chose AI don't seem to think that there's a big difference between AI and humans in the quality of emotional support they provide. Whereas people who chose human think that humans are almost twice as better, as good as AI in providing emotional support. So we really have these two mindsets that are really different in people's expectation on what are they going to get in this interaction. And I do want to point out, of course, Patty kind of points out something really important, which is very much depends on the content of the emotion. And we've done a lot of work on that, but I don't have the time to explore it. But for sure, these effects are more emphasized when we're thinking about kind of emotional, embarrassing situations and so on and so forth. Okay, so one interesting question is, okay, how did they value this conversation? So people were assigned to talk to either AI or human, or sorry, they had to choose and then they were assigned. So here I'm showing you the main effect. So how did they value the conversation based on who they were talking to? So, and here we basically see the main effect that I've already shown you, which is basically people rate the enjoyment is higher for an AI compared to human. They think of they thought it was more satisfying to talk to an AI, and they would like to continue the conversation more with an AI versus human. But remember, 70% of our participants preferred AI. So it would be really interesting to examine these ratings when we conditional them on participants' choice. And that's exactly what I'm showing you here. So looking, for example, at continue the conversation, when we look at the people who chose AI, sorry, when we did people who are assigned to AI on the x-axis, the people who chose AI are the ones who are driving this increase in satisfaction. Whereas the people who preferred humans are not more interested to continue the conversation with the AI versus human. So in other words, these results are very much depend on what people preferred initially or what partner people preferred initially. And we see the same effect when we look at all the other metrics. Now, I want to point out something really important, which is when people are assigned to chat with humans, so this is on the right side of this, the right side here. We don't see a difference between enjoyment, for example, with AI or with the human, based on who you chose. So, in other words, it's not that the graph here reverse or flips such that the people who chose human now enjoy the conversation more with the human, but rather it's equal. So there is some asymmetry here that benefits the AI, such as there's no difference between in terms of choice for the human side, but there is a difference on the AI side. All right. So basically, um, the third conclusion that I want, so sorry, there are three conclusions that I wanna end and leave a few minutes for questions. And I have a lot more results to show, but I want to open it up a little bit so that we have a little bit time for questions. One, AI reappraisal is rated as higher quality, but some of it may be driven from form, from the type of language that it is used rather than content. Two, changing the label of emotional support reveals people's need for genuine affective responses, both motivation and kind of emotion. And user preference for interaction partner seems to play an important role in people's satisfaction with the received support. So it seems that the quality of support, or at least the difference that we see, the AI superiority that we see, very much depends on what you wanted to do in the first place. Okay, so we have a few minutes. I'm happy to show more results, but I also wanna uh, I wanna answer a few questions. Okay, so Julie asked, what factor do you think made people choose AI over human in the first place? In other words, what do you think differentiate the AI chose group versus human group? Okay, so we did run that analysis, and the main driver for the AI group is the kind of non-judgment context. So what drives the human choice is emotional support, and what drives the AI choice primarily is non-judgment. Uh, Sorry, co-host, do you want to ask questions or should I keep reading from the chat?
No, feel free. I think we have about 5 minutes left. So I can summarize them for you, but if you see anything that you want
Okay.
to address.
Okay, Nisha asks, what would your advice be for a socially responsible impact company that wants to scale emotional wellness in between accessing their humans? How do you leverage AI responsibility and effectively to give us more deeply human and grow? Okay, great. So it's important to note that although I made the fast food kind of reference, I don't necessarily believe or think that AI emotional support should not exist or should be banned or some form. I do think, like Nisha, that there are ways to kind of complement human sort of emotional support with AI, and I'll give you a few examples. So one example is is kind of supplementing or complementing human emotional support when humans don't know what to say or when they need help in kind of developing the ability to help. So one great example of this is in peer-to-peer support networks. Peer-to-peer support networks is networks where people kind of seek help from other volunteers or from people who work in these companies. Some of these are NGOs. Coco is a great example of that. And one of the biggest issues that these companies have is that people sometimes don't know what to say. So they're paired with someone who needs help, and that person says something, and the person who volunteers really don't know what to respond. And in these cases, there's a huge cost. And what happens sometimes is that people just drop from the conversation. And there's a huge cost for doing that because if I interact with you and I drop in the middle of the conversation, um, I won't come back to volunteer, or the likelihood of me coming back to volunteer goes down dramatically. And you won't come back to this platform to get another experience of rejection. And so one kind of way to kind of address this is use AI to complement or help people provide responses when they get stuck. Um, Another obviously way to complement is in cases where there's no human. So there's a lot of use in AI emotional support when people are waiting for a therapy or we're waiting to be assigned to a mentor or to someone to talk to. And in that time, using an AI as a placeholder until a human comes in can be a really good idea. So there's many uses that and again, I don't think that any companionship is negative. I mean, for example, I think that results suggest that when older adults are using LEQ, they do see a benefit in reduced loneliness, partially because LEQ kind of recommends them to talk to their loved ones and uses a screen to interact with their loved ones. So in the cases where AI help the user develop skills and encourage them to kind of increase their human social networks and supplement that or fill that when in the cases when these are unavailable, I think this is a really promising direction. In the cases where we're going to substitute human connection with AI, my intuition, and people have very different views on this, that's not going to lead to long-term well-being. But we recently had a vote on this in lab. Um, and I don't know, there were 40 people there, and I think that was a 50-50 vote. So it's still an open question of can meaningful connections be really substituted with AI in a way that leads to improved well-being, long-term improved well-being? Um,
Cool. I think we have about 2 minutes left, but if you are able to stay a little bit longer, but no pressure. But I think I've seen a couple of questions asking a similar theme around the long-term effect, whether you see the novelty kind of dropped, after a few turn or even longer than few turn conversations. Yeah, if you could speak to that a little bit.
yeah, um, there's not a systematic there's not a lot of systematic research on this. There's some anecdotal and correlational evidence that suggests that people who are they have a rich social network benefit from companion AI companionship in the short run, but not so much that it's kind of leads to negative outcomes, but they kind of lose interest in that kind of interaction. Whereas the people who really stick and use these kind of companions in long term are people who have more need to social connections. And I think that provides us with something. So it's not so much, I mean, there's all sorts of negative effects that can occur in all sorts of contexts. Now, I'm not saying that there's not, but my point is that people often the, the few studies that actually have people who are not lonely interact with a companion for a while can actually show some benefit. But that doesn't mean that these people will want to engage with these things more on a regular basis. On the other hand, a lot of people are using sort of language models like ChatGPT for emotional support, but this is less of a relationship. It's more of kind of advice and kind of sporadic interaction. Whereas the people really develop the relationship are often those who are more in need of kind of social interactions. And that may change as the quality of companions improve or people grow up with different norms. A lot of things are moving in this space, and so there's a lot of changes. All right. I'm happy to stay for a little bit and answer a few questions, but I just want to thank all of my collaborators on this. And I just want to point out that we have two of these kind of, there are much more of these questions, kind of answers in these questions. And if you are interested in kind of looking more at these things, you should read the papers. They have a lot more information, and that may be helpful.
Great. Well,
Great.
thank you so much, Amit, for the wonderful talk. And yeah, feel free to reach out to him. If you have any follow-up questions, please read the papers. And we all can agree this is an important topic, so we can't wait to see more work done in this area. So thank you again for your work and your time.
Thank
My
you.
pleasure. Thank you, everyone. So people can really ask questions, eh? They can't log in and ask questions, right?
Uh,
Only through chat.
I think it's
I
the
mean, I can,
panelist setting, right? You have to invite them.
Ah,
or I can allow to talk without making them a panelist. There was one person who offered, but I didn't want to just like throw them up here if you weren't ready.
yeah. I'm fine, but let's see how many people. Yeah, let's see if people. If you're interested in asking a question, feel free to write in the chat, and we can get you. We can get you to talk, or otherwise.
Yeah. Sorry if I don't say their name right. Has a question, I can just put them up here.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yeah.
This is awesome. Thank you so much. Here's a question around AI replicas. What do you think about psychologists, entrepreneurs, gurus like Tanya Robbins creating AI replicas of themselves using Delphi AI? And a side question to that, think of a figure again like Tanya Robbins and an elite athlete he trains, Dracovic, right? And there are thousands of hours of recorded talks and books and interviews with these people. Very few athletes can have access to a person like this. Do you think AI replicas of these same people can provide more access to them, or is it not even close?
Yeah. So that's a good question. I know Delphi pretty well, and I think that the product that they provide is helpful for many different things. So I don't think it's useless. Let's start with that. I don't know, and I think there's many ways where a replica can be helpful in providing information, in providing advice, in providing thoughts. I don't think it's fully. I would argue that a really good Olympic coach, what they bring to their athlete is a lot more than just the knowledge that they have. I mean, the knowledge that they have could take you some step forward, and creating a replica of them would definitely could help to people who want advice on practices and kind of but I would argue that what these people bring in as a coach to someone is a lot more than just their knowledge. It's who they are and how they know to help their athletes set goals, how they infuse their own mentality and mental state to their mentees, and I don't think that could be replicated. But I may be wrong because I think that one thing that is driving all of that is the understanding that there is an agent with desires, goals, and thoughts and attention to you and your goals. And that is the main driver of things. And so I I think there's a lot of uses for replicas, but I don't think it could substitute the real thing. Um, I don't know if that's an answer.
Oh, it
Um,
is. It is. Thank you so much.
yeah, so Mila had a question on neurodivergent people. We haven't done research um, on any kind of neurodivergent people, but there's a few um, there's a few obvious uses that could be extremely helpful, both in training and kind of training of all sorts of skills and social skills, and kind of understanding humans' emotions in a better way. So there's some work on utilizing these systems for training, and I think there's a lot of promise to that. Um, I don't know. It's an interesting question of what the consequences of, but I think that what you're after is um, using companions or thinking about companions. And I think it very much depends on who stands behind that companion and what their goal is. I think if their goal is to help that person develop healthy social skills and interact with others, there's a lot of promise. If their goals is to maximize attachment and engagement and make money off this attachment, it's likely not going to be as good. But I think there's a lot of kind of it's still an open question. Um,
Maybe we'll take one last one so that
okay,
you,
one
you
last
don't get
one.
trapped in
Great.
the Zoom. And then
Yes.
if people wanted to reach out to you, what's the best way
Yeah.
they
If you want to reach out to me, you can look. I have a website, a pretty large with my email and my information. If you want to reach out, I'm on LinkedIn. I post a lot about this content. You follow me and kind of interact with me there. Yeah, I'm happy to interact.
maybe one last question from Cynthia, and then we'll wrap up here.
Okay. I still want to ask the question on confirmation bias or the over-soothing tendency of AI. Seems to be always take the side of the person. So if a narcissist is asking, yeah, unlikely AI will. Do we need a specifically trained therapist AI? Okay, there's a lot of questions, but I'll say a few things. So um, one of the issues of AI companionship is the fact, I said it differently. The biggest difference between an AI companion and a human companion is that the AI companion has no agenda in the conversation. I mean, other than selling and engaging, but whatever. Um, my point is, you can have an 8-hour conversation with your AI companion on Star Trek or whatever, Britney Spears or Taylor Swift or Quentin Tarantino or whatever. And it would never say, oh, but what about the things that are interesting to me? And in real life, most interactions involve turn taking of both who controls the conversation and the topics and the interests. So a lot of healthy social relationships involve people being interested in each other and kind of meeting people midway. And I think that is a skill that is really important for human flourishing, because if you're not able to do that, you have a very limited ability to connect and to learn. And one of the if you spend a lot of time with an AI entity that has that style of interaction, that never asks you to kind of meet them midway, you lose the ability to do that, and that potentially have very dire consequences on your ability to do that in in other contexts. So I emphasize I echo with your point, which is there's a lot of risk here, especially if we allow very young people to do that, because that is the point where they learn these skills. And so it's very important to kind of think about that. All right.
Great. I think you've generously spared your time with us enough, and then we should let you go. Thank you again to everyone, and we're gonna turn off or close the Zoom now. So
Thank you.
see you at the next seminar.
Bye. Thank you
Thank
for inviting
you.
me.
Thanks for coming.